On behalf of our team of co-sponsors, faith-based justice advocates here in Wisconsin, it is my great joy to welcome you to this month's Taking a Faithful Stand conversation. So, I'm Reverend Carrie Parker, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Council of Churches. Co-sponsors here on the call tonight are Wisdom, hello, David Liners, and Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice, Matt Canzera, hello. And we have other partners as well who have not yet made it on the call this evening, but their ability to spread the word and engage their networks is also greatly appreciated. We give thanks for the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee as one of those longtime partners in this event. Our presenter this evening is Reverend Breanna Illéné. She is of late, because I think she's on her third title with the Wisconsin Council of Churches. She is the Director of Ecumenical Innovation and Justice Initiatives, and I have to give her kudos because this morning she was at the state capitol for a state senate hearing. And this afternoon, she was trying to make up all the work she missed having been at the state capitol. And this evening, she is here with you to present. So, with that in mind, I would like you to take a moment and find a place of spirit within yourselves to pray, and then we will turn it over to Breanna. Holy One, in all the many ways we know you, we give thanks. We give thanks for the impulse to gather and to learn and to teach and to speak out. We ask you to inform the desires of our hearts, and we ask you to teach us when it is our turn to speak and when it is our turn to listen. We ask this.
I think Carrie froze, but we ask this in God's name. In the many names we know God. Amen. So tonight we are going to be talking about offering testimony as a tool of public witness and what that means and why we as people of faith show up and do that. And we're going to talk a little bit about why, how to do that and what that looks like. So first, as Carrie shared, I am the Director of Ecumenical Innovation and Justice Initiatives at the Wisconsin Council of Churches. And one of the things I do at the council, one of the many things, is coordinate our advocacy program, specifically focused on state level advocacy, but trying to equip people kind of doing that on all spectrums. I am a registered lobbyist in Wisconsin, which sounds really fancy, but it actually means that I am just up at the state capitol a lot, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means to be a lobbyist in Wisconsin. But it is something that actually makes our state unique. I've talked to people in other states and told them about this, and they say, oh my goodness, the fact that there's that much transparency in your state politics, that's amazing. And so it makes our capital actually really transparent. And so you can see who is up there. And so I am a registered lobbyist, but that is just because I do it a lot, not because I'm strong and powerful and have lots of money like some of the lobbyists we hear about. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is public testimony. It is showing up at a hearing, engaging in legislative advocacy, and speaking your voice, saying this is why we think this law should pass or it shouldn't pass. And it's something that we do as people of faith. Why should we do that? I have had days that I'm looking at a bill, it's overwhelming, and I've said, why, like, how do I speak on this? How do I show up? And Carrie has reminded me that we show up as a moral voice. We show up to say, hey, we as people of faith believe that we are called to something bigger and we are called to justice. We are called to mercy. And we um we show up to speak in response to that. We show up as people who are active in our communities, who care, who want to speak on behalf or speak with people who of certain identities, often marginalized identities, and do that work. And we are one of the many important voices that show up in legislative hearings to have a voice in our democracy. Um, One of the ways that we talk about change at the Wisconsin Council of Churches is recognizing change happens in multiple ways. Recognizing that policy change is really important. And when we are showing up in doing public testimony, we are trying to make change on a policy level. We are saying we want this law or we don't want this law. But also, we show up for other reasons too. We had a lot of conversation about this at the council, especially with some of the bills that have been targeted, that have been happening at all levels of government. What does it mean to show up in solidarity when you have a particular group of people who are targeted by a bill? Maybe the policy change, especially right now in our state government, is often really kind of played out. We know what's going to happen. Um, And so we show up, but we can also say we're going to show up and say we're showing up in solidarity with this group who's being targeted by this bill. We might know that it's going to pass these committee hearings. We know it's going to pass the floor, and we know the governor's going to veto it. But it's still important for us to show up and say we don't like this bill. Or on the other hand, we do like this bill, and we think there's a moral imperative. And so helping to build a group of people, organizing people to show up at the state capitol to help shift culture, to say we are speaking on behalf, we're standing in solidarity. The hope is that can then eventually shift policy. I've also been really reminded and have to remind myself a lot that policy change takes a long time. Many bills that we see come through the legislature at the Capitol, they've been introduced session after session. It takes multiple sessions sometimes to get a bill through. And so we keep showing up, we keep speaking out, we keep saying we support or we are against this bill and trying to help sway long-term change. Policy doesn't change quickly. I was going to show a clip. If I'll just throw it out there. If you want to see a great story, if you Google Wisconsin hearing LGBTQ Larry, the name Larry, there's a story of a man who sat in a hearing for like 6 hours. It was the longest hearing, and he had listened to all this testimony. He got up and testified, and he said, "I came to speak in favor of this bill, and I realized I've learned so much listening to this testimony that you should vote against this bill. I don't support it anymore." And it's a great example of why sometimes showing up with all these groups of people to speak on a bill actually does affect change, sometimes for individuals. So go ahead and Google that when we're done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to offer testimony. How do we do this? What does it mean to go to the Capitol or wherever and speak on behalf of a bill? One of the first things that we need to do when we do this work is understand the levels of government and how bills are made. Understand who is doing what work. Because I think so often we have these things that we care about and we want to advocate for change, but we need to know who's making these changes, who actually controls, and where's the best place to advocate for policy that we really care about. There are things that happen at the federal level, things that happen at the state, the county, school board, or local common councils. A great example I use of this is housing. There are a lot of people in our network at the Wisconsin Council of Churches who are really passionate about housing. And I've, as like kind of our advocacy person, have been working with them and talking to them and saying, like, okay, how do we help encourage you to affect change? Because there's some things that happen at the state capitol, which is one of the places I put a lot of my effort. But housing is actually a very local issue. And doing advocacy and offering testimony at your local common council or local city council is actually one of the best places to do that. Or knowing that like social services are often that's happening at county levels. Or I know this group was founded based on some stuff happening at our school boards. And so tonight I'm going to talk a lot about state level advocacy and how that works. But what I am talking about also applies at some of these other levels. There's just little nuance differences, but many of the same. If you build a muscle at the state, you can use that same muscle at your local school board or sometimes at your county board. And so you need to build the muscle and start using it and get connected in. And there's lots of levels that we can show up as people of faith. And it's important for us to show up as people of faith. I can share this picture comes from the Madison Common Council. There were a local, one of a local ecumenical partner, one of the ecumenical partners at the council had their executive director had emailed and said, "Hey, we've got some concerns about some stuff happening at the Common Council." And so there was a group of clergy that were organized to show up and speak in favor of something. And I will tell you, it was a long night. I think we were there for an hour and a half or 2 hours before we were called forward to speak because there was a lot on the agenda and there was some controversial stuff before us. And the entire room was exhausted already. But the second a group of faith leaders stood up to speak, and we were mostly clergy, but not all clergy, stood up, the entire room went and turned their attention to us. So there is power in showing up as a group to speak. And I also think there's power in showing up with your t-shirt of your church or your organization to say, this is a group of people that we are gathered together to speak, to speak together. So this is a really confusing diagram, but I find it very helpful. I kind of when we wrote the description for this, talked about the schoolhouse rock that maybe many of us are familiar with. I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill, kind of talks about how a bill becomes a law. And it's, there is a federal way that this works, but in the state level, it's actually a little different. And this is kind of a quick and dry how a bill becomes a law, that it is introduced, it is read in the assembly, there's a hearing, kind of works through a hearing process. It's usually then goes to the floor in the assembly. The same thing happens on the Senate side. The bills need to match. There might be some back and forth as they try to reconcile the bills. Then it is sent to the governor's desk where he can sign it or he can veto it. Um, this is kind of how it works. And there's a couple places where we as people of faith or we as just constituents can show up. You can show up in the very beginning of talking to your elected representatives to say, what are you doing on insert issue that you care about? How can we help push you to work on this? Here's a concern that we have and we want to fix it. And they're super aware and they're super ready to be in, many of them are ready to be in conversation and helps them know what need to be the priorities that they are working on by having you just call or email them. Um, and then the public hearing process, and that's really what I'm going to focus on tonight, is a great place to again show up at the state capitol and to know and to stand up and say, we support or we are against this bill. And then after is to continue to be in contact with your representatives. And then even with the governor's office, if you see a bill is making its way through and you like support it or you don't, you can communicate with the governor's office and say, hey, please veto this bill or please support it. We have done that as the Wisconsin Council of Churches and called the governor's office and said, hey, what are you going to do? And they won't usually indicate what they'll do, but they'll take your advice or they'll listen to your advice. They might not take it, but they'll listen. So the first question, and I think this is sometimes one of the hardest questions, is asking, how do you know what is happening? There is so much happening at the state capitol, and there's so much happening at the federal. There's so much, I mean, there's all this stuff. How do we know what is happening? And my first piece of advice is find other people who care about the same issues you do. Who are the other people that might show up at a public hearing and follow them? Get on their advocacy lists. We have advocacy lists at the Wisconsin Council of Churches, and Carrie's going to drop the link in the chat. And if you have other organizations, please drop their links or their names in the chat. Um, we kind of right now at the WCC are monitoring a couple areas: immigration, LGBTQ advocacy, housing, Christian nationalism, and poverty. And so you can sign up on there. And if you sign up, I monitor, I get an email every single day around what bills are coming up and and so my goal is to, on these particular topics, to make sure to send out an email to say, hey, there's a hearing coming up next Tuesday. Would you come with me, or would you like to submit some testimony? I try really hard not to go to the Capitol alone. And so my goal is to always have someone with me, whether that be physically knowing there's other people of faith in the room. Sometimes today I brought some testimony that someone else had written that wasn't able to make the hearing, but I brought it with me. Sometimes I will also we've reached out to people and dropped some of what they have to say in our written testimony. Our goal at the council is to be a network and bring the network with us. Um, Donna says the League of Women Voters Wisconsin has legislative action alerts. I also know that Voces de la Frontera has been pretty active on immigration. ACLU of Wisconsin does stuff around civil rights and a kind of a broad swath of topics. I One of the things I really need to do some work on is figuring out who the environmental folks are, and who's sending out that, because I know a lot of people in our networks care about environment. So that's a question I'm sitting with right now. Carrie lifts up WAVE and the 80% Coalition. They lift up issues on gun violence. So part of what you do is figure out who these people are, sign up for their lists, follow them on social media. It's a great way to know what's happening. This information is also, and I realized I should have screenshot the front of this page, but the Wisconsin State Legislature page does have all of this information on it. When there is a public hearing coming up, it is listed on there. You can find all the bills that are introduced online, um, on the Wisconsin State Legislature page. And every time there's a bill, so if you find out, okay, there's this bill that I care about, I'm going to walk us through a little bit of what that looks like. Um, and these are pretty easy to find. You can go on the page, and as you see up in the right-hand corner, you can search the name of the bill. I also, thanks, Carrie. Carrie just dropped the chat, or in the chat, this page. I also find that if I just Google Wisconsin Legislature Senate Bill 57, it typically will come up too. And so this is how you can see the exact bill that is coming up for a hearing that you can discern if you want to testify on or testify about. Um, so here you can see this is actually a bill I testified on today, Senate Bill 57. Um, in there, you can also, if you see where it says see also, it says 2025 Assembly Bill 24. That's the companion bill. These are typically the same bill, but sometimes there's little nuances and difference. Sometimes if you really care about something that's coming up and you're not able to make a hearing, maybe it's the assembly hearing, you can say, well, let me keep my eye open for the Senate hearing and I'll testify on at that time. So that's a good way to say maybe you don't need to show up for both, but you want to show up for one. Um, so you can go on here and you can kind of find out all kinds of information. You can see the history on the bill, who has introduced it, who are the co-sponsors, if it's had a hearing yet, when it goes to the floor, and follow it through the whole process. If you click on bill text, it looks like this, and you can read the text. I want to lift up. I am not a lawyer. I did not study law. I find law very confusing. I really appreciate these analysis by the legislative reference bureaus because they kind of tell you what it says and give you some good, like, more lay people terms for those of us who aren't lawyers of what the bill is actually about. Um, you'll notice that it's changed a little bit to this image from the first image I put because I actually just screenshot this right before I logged on today because today this bill had a hearing, as I said. And so where you see bill hearing materials, this is when people come to the public hearing, and if they submit written testimony, I typically bring a copy that I give to for submission for hearing materials of what I'm going to say. Um, you can submit it, or they all show up there. So you can click on that and see what did certain people submit about this bill kind of after the fact. I also find it really helpful sometimes if you're looking at a bill where the other side like where the assembly side already happened and you're looking at a Senate bill, go look at the assembly bill, click on LC bill hearing materials, and you can see what did people say last time? What did they testify on? Are there ideas that you want to lift up? Are there ideas that you want to kind of try to refute or say something about? You can kind of get a sense of how the first hearing went. Um, so that happens, or that's there. The other thing I want to lift up that I find really helpful is the Wisconsin Ethics Commission information. This is where that lobbyist thing comes in. Those of us who are there representing organizations, we have to register to say we spoke in favor or against a bill and we've had contact. And so you can click on there and see. So this was this bill I'm talking about. This is where people stood on it today. These are the people who registered. The down arrow were against the bill. So you can see the Wisconsin Council Church doesn't actually did this a while ago, notified them. Or you can see the people for the bill. This sometimes is a good sense too of who might show up at a hearing because people will sometimes register in advance. And so you can say, okay, here's some people that might be speaking for this bill. Here are some other people who might be speaking against this bill. Thanks, Carrie, for lifting up lobbyists aren't necessarily evil. So the first thing you do if you decide I'm going to go to a hearing, I want to testify is write some testimony. So here's a little bit easy, kind of an easy guide of what you can do. First, who are you? Why do you care about this bill? What in your identity makes you want to show up? Is it because you're showing up as a Christian? Is it because you're showing up because you're an immigrant or you are part of an identity? Is it just, I'm a Wisconsin resident? Um, One of the things I want to say on this is if you are part of an organization, you are welcome to say that. I'm here because I belong to First United Methodist Church. But it's also really good afterwards to say, but I am speaking on my personal capacity, not as a representative of them. Because if you start representing an organization and you are on staff, that may shift you into a lobbyist role, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, some more about too, but like you want to be careful. There's also the reality of many of our organizations and our churches are diverse. And so if you are going to speak on behalf of a faith-based organization, a faith community, or a church or whoever organization, like you need their permission. I can't stand up and say, "Hi, I'm a member at whatever church and I speak on their behalf." But unless you actually have the permission, probably of the administrative council or kind of leadership team or whoever leads that congregation, you don't want to do that. So you can share your affiliation. I heard someone today say, I'm a member of Orchard Ridge United Church of Christ and I belong to Moses. I am not here speaking on behalf of them, but I just want you to know what I am a part of, and kind of shared that in her testimony. Um, so who are you? Why do you care about this issue? And this is the space that you really get to shine. share a personal story, share your faith, share whatever it is that really um, brings you to this. This is a really powerful space. I will share today that I testified on this bill and I came and spoke on behalf of the Wisconsin Council of Churches and did kind of read our testimony. And they heard me, but they were like, okay, thanks. And I left. And then a woman got up and spoke about kind of a couple people after me and shared her that she was there as a person of faith. And she actually spoke from a pretty interfaith perspective, but really did that moral call well and actually had a whole conversation with the representatives and the senators on the committee that kind of had some back and forth and got some really juicy conversation happening because she was sharing from her personal experience. That's what this is about, is like, how does this affect you as a Wisconsin resident? And if you are, it's actually, I'll say, like, I love that I show up as representing this huge organization, but I'll be honest, there's days I'm like, I wish I could just be myself because there's so much juicier stuff in my personal story than the organizational. So know that like your identity and who you are and your convictions really matter. And that actually helps bring these issues forward. Um, and then be really clear in your call to action. Please oppose Senate Bill 57 or please support this bill or tell them where you stand. Um, it is good to include at least your town and maybe your zip code because they can know, okay, you are this constituent. People will know whose constituent you are, where you're coming from. You don't have to share your full address. I would recommend not doing that because if you write testimony and you submit it, it is public. It is public. People will see it. So it's that balancing showing who you are, but also keeping some privacy. Um, go find daddy. Okay. Yep. Sorry. Okay. Go find daddy. Sorry. Kids coming in, dogs and kids. Um, one of the things about writing testimony for these state level hearings is they do need to be submitted in person. It does not mean that you have to submit it. And so we've been doing some of this that when we are planning to go to a bill or going to a hearing, if people want to submit written testimony, I will bring it and submit it on your behalf. Um, and so that's something that we can coordinate. And I know some other organizations, Fair Wisconsin, I should have listed them earlier. They do LGBTQ advocacy. They are really big on getting submitted testimony. And so sometimes when they show up, I will watch them carry in file boxes of written testimony because they say, hey, we want to show where Wisconsin stands on these bills. So it's really powerful to have a collection of written testimony. But you need someone who will go to the Capitol on the hearing day during the hearing who will deliver it. So a few places of ways to bring in your faith. Are there stories or verses from scripture in your tradition that will help enunciate kind of what you're saying? Are there denominational statements? Did your tradition, whether whoever they are, have they released stuff? Are there resolutions? Are there things that you can say like, hey, as a Lutheran, this is what I believe, and this is what my denomination says too. Are there broad theological ideas? We talk about we've talked like today we talked a lot about this idea of loving your neighbor and welcoming the stranger, which does have scriptural basis but also is just this theological idea. We've also talked about nonviolence. How do we make sure to live that out? Are there personal stories from your faith community? Do you belong to a faith community that has a food pantry or something like that that you've had experience with whatever this bill is talking about? And then I think the reminder that many representatives are also people of faith. And so I heard that today in the hearing that I was at, that like multiple representatives were talking about their faith. One shared that he'd grown up Catholic and didn't practice it anymore, but like what he understood from the Catholic faith. And so like that is a something to know, is that you might be talking to someone who agrees with you. You also might be talking to someone who, like, in theory shares your same religion, but has a very different view of that. And I actually saw that at the Capitol today as well. So when you go to a hearing, it is pretty simple. You show up at the room, wherever it is, and outside the door, if it is an assembly hearing, there will be a table that has these pieces of paper that you fill out. Um, they look kind of like this, and so this is the assembly side. The Senate side is fancier. Someone said, oh, they have more money. So they actually have little like machines, and you can actually register online. Um, but you fill out the date, you fill out the bill number. They typically have a copy of the bill right there. So you can, if you forget, you can be like, oh yeah, what bill was this? You fill out your name, um, your street address, your city, your email address. These are not public, but they kind of go into the record. And then if you are part of an organization that is lobbying the organization you represent, if you are, most people will leave that blank. Um, because you are not there lobbying, you are just there as a Wisconsin resident. And then you check whether you are in favor or against. And one of the things I think to note is you don't have to speak. You could just show up and register for or against the bill. And that's a great way to, as kind of talked about this building and growing muscles. If it seems really intimidating to speak, just maybe pick a hearing or two and show up and just register for or against a bill. You don't have to speak. It's okay. Um, so I kind of said this about lobbying, and I just want to lift that up again. In Wisconsin, if you have six contacts on behalf of an organization in 6 months, you have to register as a lobbyist. And so just be aware of that. So if you do decide to speak on behalf of your congregation or your organization, like, you can do that again with their explicit permission. You have to go through your board or your whatever process you have. If you have that, you can do that, and you don't have to register with a lobbyist unless you do it more than 5 times in 6 months. Then it is a whole process, and you have to track it, and you have to pay some fees, and it's a whole thing. And so, like, fine, but just know what you're getting into. And I do know that, and I don't know as many of the details, but some local cities do have similar policies. So if you are, again, if you are speaking on behalf of an organization, know that you might have to register. But the majority of us are going to show up as Wisconsin residents, as residents of our city, as just as people. Then you're fine, and you don't have to do any of this. Um, so if you plan to speak at a hearing or plan to attend a hearing, also you could just show up. Um, I recommend planning on speaking about 3 minutes. Your written testimony can be longer, but especially if it's a hearing that has a lot of people, they will often limit it. And sometimes they will even have a timer that will go off. And after 3 minutes, they say, okay, finish up. They don't usually like cut you, but they say, now you need to be done. Um, and it's just probably nice courtesy to keep it succinct. Um, Even if you're going to speak, it's really nice to bring a copy for a written copy for the record. You don't have to, but it's nice to go into those hearing files and be posted online. Um, you could also submit a written copy and then kind of do something more extemporaneous speaking. It's up to you. I do say, especially again, if you're going to a hearing that people have a lot of opinions on, bring snacks, bring in some drinks, bring some water, bring some coffee. Sometimes there is coffee and water in the room, but like, be prepared to wait a while. Um, it can be a long process, and you can step out and take some refreshment or go to the bathroom, but like, you might be in a room for quite some time, so just be prepared for that. And so it's also great to bring a friend. Don't, as we say at the council, don't go alone. Bring someone with you. Even if they're not going to speak, they can always register against or for the bill. and not have to speak. But it's nice to have that solidarity. It's nice to have that person when you're done say like, good job, to just be in community. One of the things you do need to be prepared for is that representatives may ask you questions after you testify. Um, it is an interesting process. It can, I will be honest, can be a little stressful. There are days that I testify and I get up and they don't ask questions, and I walk away and I say, "Oh, thank goodness they did not ask me questions," because I just wasn't in the mood today. And then there's days that I've actually found it interesting to respond to questions and have conversation. There are rules around it, and the chair of the committee will usually kind of keep you to them, that the representatives can ask questions, and in fact they're supposed to ask questions. Sometimes they grandstand a little and then they don't ask a question, and the chair will be, "Hey, Senator, hey, Representative, your job is to ask a question. Do you have a question?" And then your job is to respond, and you are not allowed to ask them questions, even if you may have them. Um, and so it's kind of this space for dialogue, but there's rules about it. Um, I will share anecdotally of, if you get a little snippy in your testimony, I may have done that a time or two, that they may get snippy in their questions. We're all human. We respond to the energies that we are given. So just know that if you're really forceful in your testimony, or you're saying things that are provocative, which you are allowed to say, they may come back at you in a more provocative manner. And so just be aware of that. And often it does seem that if one side asks questions, the other side will too. And sometimes they are softball questions that the the staffer or the representatives they want to highlight something you said. It was a great piece. So, hey, you shared this thing. Can you tell me more about this? And kind of get you to talk longer than those 3 minutes that sometimes you're allowed to do. One of the things that I think for me, I always find grounding is the reminder that you don't have to answer their questions. You, it's a great thing to say, you know what, I'm not an expert. I don't know about that. I have said that in hearings. I've been asked questions and said, you know what, I'm not an expert in architecture, which you're asking me a question about right now. I'm a pastor. So I can only speak from a spiritual perspective. And so that is always a fair game and a fair out to say, you know what, I'm not an expert in that. I'm not sure. If it's something that you do have a legitimate, like, that's a great question and let me think about it, you can always offer to follow up. It's actually great to follow up and to say, hey, send them an email afterwards and say, hey, you asked this question in the hearing. Here's the answer. Let me tell you more about that. That is something you can do. And you can tell them that in the hearing. You know what? I don't know that answer right now, but let me do some research and I'll follow up with your office and get back to you. I finally, as we close, want to lift up a note on being in public. This is a public endeavor. Um, Most hearings are broadcast on something called Eye. You can go online and you can watch the hearing from your living room or your bedroom or your office, wherever you are. And what that means is anybody else can do it too. You are visible and you are public. People will also download clips and can use them. And so like the clip I spoke about Larry, um, like that was shared on TikTok by the ACLU of Wisconsin, and it went viral. It had for sure thousands, but I would guess probably by this point millions of views. I had friends on the East Coast who were sharing Larry at the Wisconsin hearing. And so like know that what you say is public. Know that people might clip it and share it. Um, this can be a great way. This can be a way to really get the word out, but it also like you just need to be aware that people might follow up. People might say, "Oh, hey, this church supports or doesn't support this bill. Oh, this person like you might be on the internet." And the same thing about written testimony. That is public and so can be searched and can know that you stand for or against a bill. And so that's just something to be aware of when you are doing this work. Overall, it's a great way to be public. I also encourage many people when you go to this Capitol, take a photo, share it. If you're on social media, share it on your social media. I often find myself, one of the ways I keep myself entertained, because again, the hearings can be long, is if I know people going up, I will snap photos of them testifying, and then I often send it to them with my implicit, hey, share this on social media. Because I think that's part of our role too, is to help people know what's happening where at these hearings, and to know what's happening and know that we stand for or against a bill and be really public about that. So there's space for you to be more public and to share what's happening. Share your written testimony on your Facebook page. That sort of share it on Saturday or Sunday or Friday or whenever your faith community meets. Like, say, hey, guess what? If there's space, like, I went to the Capitol and this is what I did, and help communicate about all of that because, as I said, it's important for us to show up to say this is what people of faith believe. So with that, if there are any questions and answers, well, I guess I get the answer, but any questions, I'm happy to take a few and uh, share what we know.
Oh, I am back. My computer decided to start working again. I've been answering a few questions in the chat as we have gone along. Um, there was a sense I think I got from one questioner about whether there is a chance to testify online from a distance.
Mhm.
And I offered some opportunities to um, talk to your legislators from closer to home, even though you can't testify by live feed. So I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about talking to your legislative staff in their in-district offices.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way is to reach out to them. They are super, at least in my experience, very responsive of knowing they want to know what their constituents believe. Even if you disagree with them, just keep showing up. Um, I think it's important for us to speak up. Um, I also, one of the things I often lift up is we love our representatives, but also know that their staff have a lot of power. And let's be honest, their staff have more power often. And so, don't dismiss if you're like, oh, well, I got the staff, not my representative. They're the ones who often are keeping their representative apprised of everything. So be kind to them, speak to them the same way or even more than you would of your rep.
And the amount
And
of
then Carrie did lift up,
information.
oh, sorry, Carrie did lift up around budget time. They do a road show. So they were up in Hayward and I forget where else. Hayward was the one that stuck in my mind. So every other year they do the budget, and that's a great place to show up on state issues, to testify at these kind of public hearings that are held in, I think usually gyms somewhere, some large space that can hold lots of people.
The amount of information the legislators have incoming is no joke. So the importance of their staff members in digesting that information and getting it to them in a usable form is really critical. And even getting in touch with your legislators when you know they agree with you. Lots of times we focus on trying to convince the people that might be on the fence or who don't agree with us. But remember, it's really important for the folks who agree with us to also get a good word now and then too. We can also encourage. And that can do a world of good on a rough day.
And I think helps them know what our priorities. If they've
Mhm.
got a lot, even if they're getting a lot of calls that people say, hey, we all agree with you, but they're all on a certain topic. Okay, we really need to focus on this because this is where our constituents are really concerned or really active. I think that's helpful as well, of just like they keep tallies. Okay, 6 people called about this topic.
And if we have an impact story from their home
Mm,
district, that can be something they can use in a speech on the floor,
mm.
and that can be really helpful as well. Are there other questions you have? We still have a few more minutes.
Can you call them too much? There's, the 5 calls every day that I've been doing with my congressional folks. And I'm kind of wondering, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I know, heard you before. They know who I am. I don't know, does it pay? I have something different every day, but I don't know.
I think it's about relationship. And so the fact that they know you is huge. I will say I've sat in I'm thinking of an event. I attended an event last fall, I think it was. And there was a state representative who spoke and someone raised their hand and asked a question. I think they introduced herself and she goes, "Oh, hey, yeah. Good to see you here." And so like builds that relationship, which I think is important. I will say, and I also think the other thing is if you're making 5 calls a day, can you vary who you're calling? Because it's work to make those 5 calls. So making sure that, yes, you might be calling your federal people and your people in Congress, but like calling state folks as well, or knowing, um, I know it's sometimes, and this gets really into the nuances, but knowing, oh, hey, here's a bill that we really care about, that is up and actually has, I'm just thinking of a particular bill, has broad bipartisan support, but the speaker won't bring it to the floor for a vote, so call the speaker's office. And so part of it is, I think, knowing again who it is to call and can help you give some variety so you're not calling the same people all the time. Well, I think with that, I will close that I am always happy to be a resource if you are someone who wants to get involved. Feel free to reach out to me, sign up for some of our lists, but also if it's something that the council's not active on, but you're like, hey, I really care about this topic and I want to go to this hearing and will you help me know how to testify? Like I'm here to help. My goal is to get more of all of us at the state capitol. So I'm here to be a resource if you've got questions, and if I don't know the answer, I'm happy to kind of work the network and figure out who might know an answer. Because this is a process. I often share that I met with my predecessor, Peter Bakken, who'd been in this role for 18 years. And one of the first, he was going into all these details about how you do this and these coalitions. And I paused him and I said, "Hey, Peter, how does a bill become a law in Wisconsin?" And that was me a little less than 2 years ago. I'd never spoken at a legislative hearing until I kind of stepped into this role at the council. Um, it's something we can learn. It's a muscle we can build. It's messy, it's complicated, and that's why we do it together. We are together in community, and we can all kind of learn and engage in our democracy in this way. So,
I think the gifts of doing this as a coalition is that not one of our groups has to be an expert in anything. Not a single staff member or volunteer has to be an expert in anything. It may be that the Wisconsin Council of Churches has an office that's closest to the Capitol, and Wisdom may have the largest network spread across Wisconsin of folks that they can turn out. And Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice has its strength in particular areas, and the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee has its strengths in particular areas. And together, we can find you the people to connect to so you can have an impact on the issues that matter to you. And we can find you someone to bring with you or inform you so that way you are not doing this alone. So, Breanna, if you were to ask people to do one thing after participating in this evening? What is that one thing you would ask them to do?
Oh, see, I like thought of three. One.
3 is fine. No objection to
I
3,
would,
and then they can
well,
pick.
well, also two. First is sign up for an organization, like find a list of an organization who's doing advocacy of issues you care about. So it might be some of the WCC stuff, and even if you're not a member at a church and you're a different faith community, you are welcome to sign up for our stuff and kind of take from it what you need to know these bills are coming, or find a different organization, sign up, find an there are great Instagram pages out there too. That's actually where I see a lot of stuff. Um, find an org to follow so that you can kind of be in tune with what's happening at the state capitol or wherever you want to focus. And then the second is grow your muscle. So it might be, I'm going to go and I'm going to testify, but it might just be, you know what, I'm going to show up at a hearing or I'm going to go attend a school board meeting. Figure out where that is and show up.
So number 1, sign up for info. Number 2, show up. Okay. Looking at my other co-sponsors here, do you have anything you would like to add before we move on to our closing prayer for the evening? Okay. I do have the link for our next Taking a Faithful Stand event, and we'll be having a presentation from the head of Forward Latino, Daryl Marine. And his talk is about faith and immigration. I want to get that correctly for you here. And it's called Immigration, Fictions, Facts, and Faith. And it will be on the evening of June 10th. And you can go to our website and there's full information on that. And yes, we will have a recording of tonight's event. We will get that up and we will send it to everybody who is here this evening, so you will not miss out. David, if you would like to offer the closing prayer, I will get the link to register for next month and I will put that in the chat for everyone. And then folks can get about enjoying the rest of your evening before sunset.
Cool, thank you. And thanks, Breanna, for this, as always. Very well done. I wanted just to kind of start with a little reflection that recently I was actually at my state senator's office, and he has a big chart on the wall of how much money was spent by which lobbying groups in 2024. And, oddly, Wisconsin Council of Churches didn't make the list. Neither did WAVE, neither did any of the other people that were mentioned here. And as a matter of fact, nobody on that list went there to support the interests of poor people or people with disabilities or immigrants. Nobody on that list was about that. It was very much in terms of the big money that gets spent. So, and I just wanted, and after I saw that, I bumped into this quote from Reinhold Niebuhr that I thought I'd share with you. It's written in his usual way, so I'll try and make it make sense here. It's all one long sentence. So it says, since inequalities of privilege are greater than could possibly be defended rationally, the intelligence of privileged groups is usually applied to the task of inventing specious proofs for the theory that universal values spring from and the general interests are served by the special privileges which they hold. In other words, people with privilege will generally use every resource at their command to convince everybody that their privilege is what holds the world together. And that's actually who that list was on my senator's wall, was people coming in to defend their privilege. I feel like our special role is we're not going to defend our own privilege. That's what I think is actually almost jarring about people of faith showing up in places like this, because we're not there to defend our own privilege. We're there to defend our values. And we're not there to create values that justify our privilege. So, with that, I just want to offer this prayer. Merciful God, you give us so many opportunities to do your will in this world. We ask you to help us to always remember to use our voices, to use what privilege we have as citizens, to speak on behalf of all of your people, to speak on behalf of the beloved community that you would have us be. We ask you to give us courage. We ask you to help us to stick together. We ask you to help us to always be persevering in sharing the values we've gotten from our faith. We ask all this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody. It was good to see you this evening. David, thank you for the prayer. Breanna, thank you for leading our presentation. We hope to see you next month for our education on immigration, fiction, facts, and faith. That link that I posted in the chat is live for you to register right now. Blessings. Have a good evening.